I would imagine that something like taxing them and regulating them the same way the state regulates alcohol would be something that I would consider a step forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Levi, any comment?
That's still not legalization.
So my question is kind of for both of you. So we've touched on the topic of, the government has the right or doesn't have the right to keep you from becoming a illusion. Well, when we look at this and we look at, legalizing drugs, all of that would have to go through our government and ultimately our House of Representatives and go through the legalization process. So constitutionally, do you believe the government has a right to step in? It's for both of you.
Constitutionally, well, so, I'm an economist, so I don't really know much about the way all these laws work. But,
You're an American, sir.
yeah, well, sorry. Well, but we still have lawyers. Okay? I think it's, if we have, look, the way we have drug laws is we have the Commerce Clause. So there are probably laws that a lot of people like that were justified by the Commerce Clause over the last 200 or so years. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable for the federal government to have those laws if they affect interstate commerce, because that's in the Constitution.
If I recall correctly, the alcohol laws were repealed because they were ruled unconstitutional. So if we are kind of putting us in the same area, then does that still apply?
Well, as long as there is interstate commerce, then, you can't just take a bottle of wine from Kansas and ship it to Missouri, right? Can you do that? Not illegal? Oh, no. This doesn't mean it shouldn't be illegal.
So I want to comment a little bit on what Levi said in the last sentence, which is it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be illegal. And what I want to stress is that that is what we are arguing here, whether or not drugs should or should not be illegal, not exactly whether or not it falls under the Commerce Clause or not. We both know that the government is going to interpret the Commerce Clause so widely that it affects, how I fold my underwear. But the question is, the question is whether or not the government ought to regulate drugs.
Next question.
Okay, this is for Levi. So, correct me if I'm wrong, your argument against the legalization of marijuana was that it would be bad for people with schizophrenia, right? Okay, so by going by that same logic, when you make fatty foods illegal for people with heart diseases so they don't have heart attacks or something like that,
Yeah, so it doesn't mean that, again, I think we treat different things differently, and that's okay. But the problem is when something is extremely harmful and cannot be used to any good effect, right? And even when we try, right, we try to make medicinal marijuana, all we do is make it more potent. So it's not like, we're not treating them the same because they're not the same. So analogies can only get us so far when we're deciding whether or not something should be legal.
can I say something? Okay, so you say because it's only harmful for schizophrenia people, but by that same logic, like I said, fatty foods are bad for people with heart.
Okay, so the other way I could make a point about this is that fatty foods are already legal, and like I said, there's no second chances. We can't go back anyway. My point is, we are on the brink. If we take this step, we can't go back. So we should be very careful about the steps we take, because we can't go back.
Alright, so my question's for Levi. So we're talking about the safety of marijuana and stuff like that. There's like a really big issue, especially in our age group right now, of people buying black market like THC cartridges, and it's been killing people because it has vitamin E inside of it, and that's like really toxic to you. So don't you think that if we were to legalize it, the FDA or whatever could actually regulate that so that way we don't get any of the harmful stuff that's actually killing people? If anything, it'd be more safe for the government to have their hands in it.
Well, I think the evidence is the other direction, because in places where we have legalized it explicitly for pharmaceutical uses, right? And pharmaceuticals are highly regulated. They're legal, but they're highly regulated, right? All we have seen is an increase in the potency of the drugs. So it wasn't like alcohol prohibition 100 years ago, when the quality of the alcohol just went down the drain, right? And literally we had bathtub gin, right? It's actually gone the other direction. And so now you have this super potent, so yeah, okay, vitamin E, fine. But, I mean, I'm not against just, making that illegal too, right?
Yeah, it's not really the potency that I'm arguing for, it's that people are doing this illegally, so they have nobody watching over them, so they're putting.
Sure, but what I'm saying is that the fact that it's deadlier, right, and it's a black market drug, that's what you're saying, right? Well, what I'm saying is that even when you make it legal, it still has a more negative effect on the person physically, because it's more potent. So it's not exactly the same thing, but they both have the same effect. They're both killing people faster.
Okay, I'm gonna let Justin last comment there. Sorry guys, we're out of time. But thank you for your. Justin, last call.
My last comment is that if you're talking about the schizophrenics who are harmed by it being more potent, sure, but the fact that the marijuana itself becomes more potent doesn't mean it's less quality, or that it has less quality, and you would still, with extremely potent marijuana, have to smoke something like 3 or 4 garbage bags full of it in order to kill yourself, which is terrifying.
So you don't care about schizophrenics? That's a joke, come on.
Okay, moving to our last round here is. Yeah.
Okay, so in my closing statement, I would just like to say that wisdom requires us to be cautious about big changes in big issues like the use of drugs. I've tried to say that a drug that most people, especially people probably your age, think is totally harmless, right, actually has some seriously negative effects, especially for people who are already vulnerable. Okay? So, if you've accepted any of my points about caution itself, about the lack of knowledge we have about what happens when we open the floodgates for all the other things we think are actually really bad, that when that happens, right, when we make the cost of production lower, and we get a lot more heroin and a lot more meth than we already have, and we lower the cost of people using it because we're not prohibiting them anymore, the demand increases, we get a lot more methamphetamines and a lot more heroin and a lot more crack, and we don't actually know what's going to happen next. So, legalizing, remember, the question is whether or not we should legalize all drugs, not just the one I've been talking about most. So, if you think that my caution to you about the economic choices, the potential harm on vulnerable populations by all of these substances, and the issue about wisdom and our lack of prediction, our lack of ability to predict what will happen, and our inability to go back. If that affects you at all, remember, then you have to agree with me and say that we shouldn't legalize all drugs. Maybe some of them should stay illegal. And that would mean you would have to vote for me next time. Or wait. I'll yield my time. I think that was rhetorically tough enough.
As of 2006, 45% of Americans over the age of 12 reported having used at least one illegal drug. Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Newt Gingrich, Clarence Thomas, and Barack Obama have all admitted using illegal drugs. George W. Bush declined to answer, but come on, he's What's the difference between the President, Speaker of the House, Supreme Court Justice, and someone who gets killed in jail or his record is tarred and must squeak by in life because of a felony drug conviction? The answer and the difference is luck. I have a friend from college who had to go to rehab for heroin. He's a surgeon now. He didn't get caught. I have another friend who was charged with having psilocybin. His court date was when we were 18, and we were starting college, and he was going to have to go to court that September, and it was September 11th, 2001, and his court date got thrown out. He is now making a lot more money than I am. He didn't get caught. If this group is representative of the nation as a whole, about half of you have tried an illegal drug. If you're in here, you probably didn't get caught, or at least not by the police. Maybe your parents caught you, or you weren't prosecuted. You should think of your friends, your potential children, and your siblings. Suppose one of them did get addicted to a hard drug. Would you want to call the police on them, or would you want to put them in rehab? I know that I would want to put my son, my brother, in rehab. This, for the record, is one of the reasons why Portugal's death rate from overdoses goes down after they decriminalized. You are more likely to get help when admitting that you are a user isn't a felony. We spend over $47 billion a year on the drug war. That's money we could be spending trying to help people who have serious drug problems instead of treating them like violent criminals and locking them up with people who have committed violent crimes for doing nothing other than what about half of Americans do anyway, and just being unlucky about it. We have absolutely nothing to show for our efforts at prohibition. Now, I know the schizophrenic example has been brought up a couple of times. I'm not so sure how well schizophrenics do in prison, but I would imagine it's a lot worse than a normal inmate. This drug war is a disaster. Let's end this ridiculous war and legalize all drugs.
All right. So we are going to have to do some tabulating here. So here's the plan, folks. We're going to drop down the screens. We have a different address. We have a different address for you to log into. And then we're going to tabulate votes and see who took the belt. So the jihad belt.
Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure.
We got a little video we're going to play in the meantime. And he's going to put the address, it's basically the same address, except it says debate 2 at the end. He's got it right over there on that screen.
Pleasure's all. Your agenda.
That won't be necessary. I am the agenda. Tell them my brother. And then tell them I'm wrong.
And your name is?
Mike. F.A.
Make sure you've all gone in to your cast your vote at the end to number 2.
Please make sure you vote on the screen to your left.
Mayor Keynes.
Yeah, we're opposed. We oppose each other.
In the same studio.
There's a booming bus cycle and good reason to fear it.
It's the animal spirit.
John Maynard Keynes wrote the book on modern macro. The man you need when the economy's off track. Depression, recession, now your question's in session. Have a seat and I'll school you one simple lesson. 1929, the big crash. We didn't bounce back, economies in the trash. Persistent unemployment, the result of sticky wages. Waiting for a few, and that's
Special.